Hey folks, it's Patriot Nurse. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, we're going to go over everything that's happened this week in regards to the Putin interview with Tucker Carlson, and then also Joe Biden completely making a rear end of himself again on TV and basically showing that he is not fit to be the commander-in-chief, and how this is all going to be playing into our calculus over the next few months. So this video is very impromptu. Oh, how much things change in a day. I didn't even have time, really, to even put myself together to make a video. So, Patriot Nurse au naturel. Friends, in the words of my friend Claude Warner, he told me this one time. He said, "Dear, when you consider that the United States is so young and that our history is so short, we have the capacity to make great pivots socially, for the good and for the bad, on the head of a pin." And that's where we're at right now. We're at an inflection point. This inflection point is born out of drastic social change, a rapid loss of our standing as a de facto hegemonic power in the world, the upstart challenges that we're seeing, and that frankly, just serial mismanagement for decades that is now coming to a head. It's like waiting for a zit to pop. Pardon the lovely descriptive term here. But when I watched Tucker Carlson's interview last night with Putin, I'm just going to give you straight up how I think about this. Watched the whole thing, all 2 hours. And then looked afterwards at Joe Biden's press conference, and then of course, the special counsel that was appointed to look into the matters about him handling classified documents and the report that came from that. All of this came out within effectively about a 5-hour drop. And starting out with the Putin interview, I want to go over and give you my thoughts on that and how I think that's going to play into things. But then also talk about just the issues with Joe Biden, the Democrat Party, and essentially what we can look forward to over the next little bit. So my background as far as Russian politics and Eastern European history, I have not studied this extensively. I do not have a college degree in this, and obviously my major was nursing. I did not spend exhaustive amounts of collegiate hours studying this. However, in my post-collegiate time, I have taken upon myself to further educate myself and to participate in great courses and several things, read books, etc., regarding imperial Russian history and also just Russian history in general. So I make the statements with that lens as my default. I'm not an expert in this, but I know enough to essentially perform decently on a Jeopardy challenge, I hope. There are a lot of you out there who have studied this in depth, or you have family from these parts of the world, and so maybe you can elucidate in the comments some further points here. The fact that Putin spent half an hour effectively in the Tucker Carlson interview drawing out the historical underpinning of the Russian cause and the Russian perspective, and then you juxtapose that against Joe Biden, who cannot remember when he was vice president, would be laughable if it wasn't so starkly real in its consequences. Russians have a very long track record of history. Their perspective is completely different than ours in the United States. For us in the United States, when you pass by historical landmarks, you're lucky if they're 250 years old. But obviously, when you're talking about the beginning of the Russian people and the Slavic empires, etc., you're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And that is a perspective. It is transformative in the way that it is applied to geopolitics and to worldview. Putin really, in this interview, laid out and started out fundamentally showing this is a completely different worldview than what y'all have. And the Tucker Carlson interview allowed him to have effectively 2 hours of unfettered access to the world in which he could essentially lay his case out. Now, I, again, am watching this with a critical eye, watching this as a child who remembers watching, in 1989, watching the Berlin Wall fall, and I remember the Reagan years and all that, watching all of this happen and listening to his perspective on things. The fact that this dropped when it did was obviously for political gain. There's no question about this. But furthermore, when our Congress is suited to take up funding bills for Ukraine in absence of border protection, it was a pretty brilliant play on his part. The timing was, for sure. Now, the Democrats, of course, are going to say, oh, this is election interference or whatever. It's like, I have no confidence whatsoever in their protestations when it comes to election interference. When Hillary Clinton is winning, 9 out of 10 coin tosses against Bernie. And so the long and short of it was, Putin, in this interview, in my opinion, showed that the world in general knows that the United States has used the dollar weaponization. The world is unhooking from it, including in Russia. And I thought it was very interesting how he pointed out that the United States sanctions ultimately against Russia ended up effectively shooting us in the foot from a monetary solvency standpoint. Because whereas previously, prior to the sanctions that the United States had put on Russia, their overall transactions in foreign trade in yuan were like, I don't know, like very, very small. I want to say it was single digit percentage, and now they're effectively like 34%, something like that. And so as the United States is losing power with its dollar, the United States is also losing legitimacy as a global hegemon, particularly when it comes to the fact that we cannot seem to A, police our own border at home, and then B, keep our promises to allies internationally, and then C, we're so overstretched from an empire standpoint that everybody freaking knows it, including Russia, including China, and he made that point. Now, his point, of course, Putin's point, is to, obviously, to advocate for his position, to advocate for his country, to advocate for his vision of what the country should be. So everyone obviously has a viewpoint bias here. And again, as I said, I'm not an expert in it. I'm just looking at this as an average person of mediocre intelligence with just a little bit of historical framework. Nothing too crazy. However, the key point in all of this was the timing and the juxtaposition of the Putin interview versus Joe Biden. Now, Joe, of course, is a victim of elder abuse, and I will stand by this. But regardless of how detestable I find the man in general, the fact is that his handlers and the Democrat Party have been abusing this man, who is obviously not fit to wipe his own rear end probably 90% of the time, and should probably be hospitalized at some point for memory issues, potentially, but at the bare minimum should be receiving care. He should not be leading the United States in the executive branch by any shape of the imagination. Furthermore, the fact that the special counsel effectively found him guilty of mishandling classified documents. This is something that, if you know anyone who has security clearances, this is something that would land you in federal prison for decades. And yet for him, because of the virtue of being of the political class, the Teflon class, the untouchable class, he doesn't get prosecuted by virtue of being a nice old man. Sounds to me like James Comey when he basically said, oh yeah, Hillary's totally guilty, but she didn't mean it. So essentially, because the political class has their excuses, they're immune from prosecution, and it showed the entire world, A, that we do not have a system of justice. We have a legal system, but there is no justice. If you cannot hold accountable a man who has jeopardized for decades members of our national security infrastructure with his negligence, you can't hold him accountable because he's old and likable, then there is no justice and no accountability. Furthermore, it's a very interesting point that Joe Biden had to get up there in front of everyone and essentially throw a hissy fit and whine about the questions that were asked him, particularly about his son. Now, actually, this is a very important point. I want to discuss this with you in a little bit of depth from a psych nursing standpoint. Because of the loss of his son, and God forbid, may nobody experience such a thing. But there's a reason why that question was asked. From a psych standpoint, the loss of a child, may no one ever know it, is considered the most stressful it's called the GAF score, the Global Assessment of Functioning. It is considered the single most stressful and life-altering event that a person can go through. More than losing, God forbid, more than losing a spouse, anything else. It is considered the greatest stressor in a person's life across the lifespan that he can ever experience. For this reason, it is considered a fairly common benchmark, if that's going to be the most stressful event in your life, that you would be able to at least remember the year or a ballpark. And the fact that he could not do that testifies to his inability to function, not only as a human being in their activities of daily living without memory care, but as president of the United States. So this is a huge thing. And the fact that he got up there and threw a hissy fit over it and then went right on to prove the point of not being able to remember who actually is the head of Egypt versus Mexico was absolutely horrifying to watch. So now this is what's going to happen. The Democrats are going to circle the wagon. They have been abusing this man and keeping him in power and allowing him to facilitate the invasion of our country, willfully harming the United States citizenry. And now they're going to yank him back. So I fully anticipate that they're going to parachute somebody in at the bottom of the ninth to run against Trump. Your guess is as good as mine. I'd be very interested to know, who do you think it is that they're going to parachute in? Please leave me a comment below and tell me who you think it is that the Democrats are going to parachute in. They're going to try and run somebody else right now because they know they can't win against Trump. Nikki Haley is obsolete. It's not going to happen. So at this point, what we have set up here is you have Putin, the head of Russia, making effectively an appeal to the world to stop funding the conflict in Ukraine and making a fairly salient, I would say, point regarding America's, 30-something trillion national debt, border issues at home. He knew all about this. The man studied, of course, and being a former KGB operative, you would expect no less. He studied his points, he knew his audience, and he knew that people in the United States are very war weary, and they're also very taxation weary, because when you have 40% to 50% of America that can't afford basic housing, and yet your puppet idiot in chief is standing up there bringing in, anywhere between 6 to 10 million people during his presidency to invade the United States and to further leech off of our tax dollars, that he's not a popular president, that people are tired of voting in endless checks and entitlements for foreign wars and escapades, which effectively amounts to money laundering justified under the banner of the federal government. But that money is not honestly gained. It is extorted under the threat of incarceration or civil assets of forfeiture and seizure of the United States citizenry. So we are about to see this thing pop. And the reason why I went into detail about this is because I really want people to wrap their heads around this and understand that even though we have been linearly and incrementally building up until this point, in my opinion, we are about to see an exponential and potentially cataclysmic change in our lifetime. In my opinion, there is a normalcy bias that it is endemic within certain generations in this country. And when I say a normalcy bias, it's, oh, we've been through this before. Oh, it's all going to turn around. And my reaction is, you have lived your life in a freaking slice of a bubble of peace throughout world history. What in the world makes us think that this Pollyannish worldview is going to be a recipe for success in a world that is so drastically changing? And it's not going to be. The best years of our country are behind us, minus a major act of God, massive repentance, or some unforeseen turn of events, which could potentially happen. The best days are behind us. We lived and built wealth in this country over the past 70 years, effectively, based on the victory of the Allies over the Axis in World War II, based on the Marshall Plan, based on the weaponization of the United States fiat currency system. Putin knows it. Everybody else around looking at the United States knows this, and people who actually study history know this. This thing is about to pop. And so when it pops, we're going to be left holding the bag. The bag at this point is Joe Biden and everything that the Democrat Party has brought into us, but the Republicans have been in many ways equally as culpable in this mess. The RNC cannot figure out what it is that it wants to do, other than spend money on useless things and waste our dollars and waste donations, of course. So at this point, we are looking at the dissolution of the United States' legitimacy as a hegemon, in my opinion, the loss of legitimacy of the federal government. And I use this not only from the Putin issues that have showed up, like the Putin and the geopolitical issues, domestically. This happened on the same week, and effectively the same cluster of weeks, as the Texas border issues, as Hawaii's Supreme Court effectively nullifying the Second Amendment, the second of the Bill of Rights to the Constitution of the United States. And the only reason, and Colorado wanting to take Trump off of the ballot. The states are pushing back against the feds because they see that the Fed is weak. So let's play this out here. If the rest of the world sees that the United States federal government is weak, and the states see that the federal government is weak, how long do you think it is that we have kicking this can down the road? What weapons do they have in their arsenal other than turning them on the American people? Like, what else can they possibly do? Raise our taxes more to the point where people are absolutely broken? There will be a point where people are going to say enough is enough. What that looks like, I'm not exactly sure, but I can look throughout history and I can see that it will be either an amicable divorce or a violent domestic. An amicable divorce or a violent domestic. And neither one of them's pretty. Both of them require us to be prepared. Beans, bullets, and band-aids. So friends, those are my thoughts given everything, and I really just wanted to share them with you. This was an impromptu video, hoping to get this word out. Please share this video. Please leave me a comment below. Like I said, who do you think it is that the Dems are going to parachute in the bottom of the ninth? I got my own personal opinions on this. We're going to see. It's going to be an interesting next few weeks on this. But this thing's about to pop, minus, I think, an act of God or a major move in the United States. What could peacefully, possibly fix this from going chaotic is a convention of states. And here's the sad thing. As soon as I say convention of states, the first thing people say is, oh, it's going to be a runaway convention. Let me get this straight. You have more confidence in the legitimacy of federal elections than you do of smaller government state-based legislatures. Really? Because the Founding Fathers didn't share that view. That's for sure. The Convention of States under Article 5 is the only way to radically castrate federal power. Putting Donald Trump in the White House is not going to fix all of this. It might alleviate and ameliorate some of these concerns for a limited amount of time, but the federal government's infrastructure and its cancerous tentacles are in everything. And until they are radically castrated in their power, they're going to continue to drive us into obsoleteness, into weakness, and ultimately into poverty. They are successfully doing it, as evidenced by the puppet-in-chief just about crapping his pants last night on stage in front of the entire world. And the rest of the world knows we're weak. The question is, are we going to be honest enough to wake up about it? Hope the video was helpful for you all today. If you enjoyed it, I hope you'll subscribe to me here on YouTube, Patriot Nurse. You can also stay with me and support me on Patreon, subscribe, Star Cryptocurrency, and PayPal. I got links below. I have one option to train with me before election. So if you want to train online, you have two options, a 4-hour and a 7-hour course. I got links below in that. The 4-hour course is $129. You can dip your toe in, and it's a cost-effective way for you to train with me without having to travel. The 7-hour herbal course is available for a higher price point and more of an investment of time and energy in yourself. The one class that I am teaching this year is at the end of September, and it is a boot camp. That is everything I offer. I have 20 spots. That is it. That's all I'm doing this year. So that link is in the description box below. You can also find it at the patriotnurse.com website. Hope the video was helpful for y'all. Have a blessed weekend. For now, it's Patriot Nurse signing off, and I'll see y'all later. Bye.